Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of his ship, looking out at the stars. The New Horizon was not a big ship, but it was home to him and his crew. For 3 years now, they had been living on Harmony Prime, the biggest space station in the galaxy. It was where all the different alien races came to talk and make deals. Jake was 42 years old and had been in space for most of his adult life. He had short brown hair and kind eyes that made other species trust him. That was important for his job. Humans were still new to the Galactic Council. They had only joined 50 years ago, and many aliens still did not know what to think of them. "Captain, the morning briefing is ready," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Bennett. She was Jake's second in command and his best friend. Lisa was smart and good at talking to aliens. She had blonde hair and always wore her uniform perfectly. The other species respected her because she never lost her temper, even when talks got difficult. Jake nodded and followed Lisa to the meeting room. The rest of his crew was already there. Tony Rodriguez sat at the communications desk. He was young and had black hair and a quick smile. Tony could speak 12 different alien languages, which made him very useful. Amy Walsh, the chief engineer, was checking her tablet. She had red hair and always seemed to be fixing something. Dr. Chris Hammond, their medical officer, was reading reports about the refugees who had been coming to the station. "What do we have today?" Jake asked as he sat down. Lisa pulled up a hologram showing the meeting schedule. "The Zephyrians and Altarians are meeting again. Admiral Korvax is getting more aggressive in his demands." Jake frowned. The Zephyrians were a problem. They looked like large lizards that walked on 2 legs. They had conquered many worlds and seemed to enjoy fighting. Their leader, Admiral Korvax, was especially dangerous. He was 8 feet tall, with dark green scales and yellow eyes that looked at other species like they were food. The Altarians were completely different. They were made of living crystal and communicated by changing colors and making light patterns. They were peaceful and had never fought a war. Their technology was amazing, but they had no weapons and no army. They believed that all life was sacred and that violence was wrong. "Korvax wants 3 of their core worlds," Lisa continued. "The Altarians are refusing, but they are scared. They have never dealt with anyone like the Zephyrians before." Tony looked up from his console. "I have been listening to Zephyrian communications. They are calling the Altarians crystal bugs and saying they are too weak to deserve their worlds." Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his face calm. Humans had learned to control their emotions around other species. Many aliens thought. Humans were weak because they were always polite and tried to find peaceful solutions to problems. "We need to help mediate," Jake said. "The Council cannot let the Zephyrians just take what they want." Amy looked up from her tablet. "Captain, I have been studying Zephyrian ships. Their weapons are old but powerful. If they attack the Altarians, it will be a massacre." Dr. Hammond set down his reports. "I have been treating Altarian refugees who fled from the border worlds. They are terrified. Some of them have stopped glowing entirely, which means they are in shock. They keep asking why anyone would want to hurt them." Jake stood up and walked to the window again. Outside, he could see ships from dozens of different species docked at the station. The Galactic Council was supposed to keep peace between all these races. But sometimes Jake wondered if peace was just another word for letting bullies do whatever they wanted. "Sir," Tony said quietly, "there is something else. I intercepted a message from Earth yesterday. They are asking for updates on the situation." Jake turned around. Earth rarely contacted the diplomatic ships unless something was very wrong. "What kind of message?" "It was coded, sir. But it was from Defense Command, not the diplomatic corps." Lisa and Jake exchanged glances. The diplomatic corps handled all. normal communications with human ships. Defense Command only got involved when there might be trouble. "Keep monitoring all channels," Jake said, "and let me know if Earth sends anything else." The meeting broke up, and Jake went to his office. He pulled up files on the Zephyrian Empire and the Altarian Republic. The Zephyrians had been expanding for decades, taking worlds from weaker species. The Galactic Council always condemned their actions but never did anything to stop them. The Altarians had been members of the Council for over 200 years. They shared their advanced technology freely and had helped dozens of species improve their lives. They had never asked for anything in return except to be left in peace. Jake thought about his own species. Humans had been careful to present themselves as peaceful and reasonable. They followed all the council rules and never caused trouble. But sometimes Jake wondered what would happen if humans stopped being so polite. He pushed the thought away. Humans were civilized. They solved problems with words, not weapons. That was what made them different from species like the Zephyrians. His computer chimed with an incoming message. It was from the council chambers. The Zephyrians had called for an emergency meeting. Jake sighed and got up to join the others. As he walked through the corridors of Harmony Prime, Jake noticed how other species looked at him and his crew. The insect-like Hivari chittered nervously when humans passed. The floating morphic collective pulsed with uncertain colors. Even the warlike Coranians seemed to step aside when humans approached. Jake had always assumed it was because humans were still new to the council. But lately, he had begun to wonder if there was another reason. Maybe the other species sensed something in humans that they kept hidden, even from themselves. The thought made him uncomfortable. Humans were supposed to be the good guys, the ones who brought peace and understanding to the galaxy. They were not supposed to be the ones that other species feared. But as Jake entered the council chambers and saw Admiral Korvax standing over a trembling Altarian delegate, he felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Something that had nothing to do with diplomacy or peace. Something that felt very much like anger. The attack began at dawn, station time. Jake was in his quarters when the alarm started screaming. He rolled out of bed and grabbed his uniform, his heart already racing. Emergency alarms on Harmony Prime meant something very bad was happening. "Captain, to the bridge, emergency." Tony's voice crackled over the intercom. Jake could hear the panic in the young man's voice. Jake ran through the corridors, dodging other crew members and aliens who were all heading to their emergency stations. When he reached the bridge, he found his crew gathered around the main display screen. What he saw there made his blood turn cold. Altarian Prime was burning. The beautiful crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years were being smashed by heavy weapons fire from orbit. Zephyrian warships hung in space above the planet like giant metal vultures, pouring destruction down on the helpless world below. "How long has this been going on?" Jake asked, his voice tight with control. 20 minutes, Lisa replied. She was pale, and her hands were shaking. Admiral Korvax launched a surprise attack. The Altarians had no warning, no time to prepare. On the screen, Jake could see the magnificent crystal spires of the capital city cracking and falling. Each building had been grown over centuries, shaped by Altarian artists who saw their cities as living works of art. Now they were all being destroyed in minutes. "Are we getting any communications from the surface?" Jake asked. Tony nodded, tears in his eyes. "Yes, sir. But they are not good." He pressed a button, and the bridge filled with the sound of Altarian distress calls. The aliens communicated through light and sound, and their panic came through as high, keening wails mixed with flashing colors that hurt to look at. "They are asking for help," Tony translated. "They keep saying they do not understand why this is happening." They have children trapped in the schools and hospitals, The crystal structures are collapsing, and they cannot get them out. Dr. Hammond burst onto the bridge. Captain, we have refugee ships incoming. Altarian vessels that escaped the attack. My medical bay is ready, but sir, some of these people are badly hurt. Jake nodded. Do everything you can for them. Amy looked up from her engineering station. Captain, I am reading massive energy signatures from the Zephyrian fleet. They are not just attacking military targets. They are destroying everything, homes, schools, hospitals, even the crystal gardens where Altarian children play. The main screen switched to a view of one of the refugee ships docking with Harmony Prime. Jake watched as Altarian survivors stumbled out of their damaged vessel. Many of them were cracked and dim, their natural light barely flickering. Some were carrying smaller Altarians, children whose light pulsed weakly with fear and pain. Captain, Lisa said quietly, the Galactic Council is calling an emergency session. Jake wanted to stay and help the refugees, but he knew his duty. You have the bridge, he told Lisa. I will be back as soon as possible. The council chamber was in chaos when Jake arrived. Representatives from dozens of species were all talking at once, their voices creating a wall of noise that the universal translators could barely handle. At the center of it all stood Chairman Trilakx, a tall, thin alien with blue skin and 4 arms, trying to restore order. Please, honored delegates, Trilakx was saying, we must approach this situation with calm and reason. Calm? The speaker was Ambassador Brightsong, one of the few Altarian representatives on the station. Her crystal body was flickering with colors that Jake had learned meant extreme distress. My world is dying while you talk about calm. Jake took his seat in the human section and listened as the debate continued. The Morphic Collective wanted to file a formal protest. The Trilaxian Federation suggested economic sanctions. The insect-like Hivari buzzed about forming a fact-finding committee. Everything they suggested would take weeks or months to implement. Meanwhile, Altarian Prime was being destroyed in real time. The debate was interrupted by a new transmission. The main screen lit up with the image of Admiral Korvax standing on the bridge of his flagship. Behind him, Jake could see tactical displays showing the continuing bombardment of Altarian Prime. Honored council members, Korvax said, his voice filled with mock politeness. I thought you might like to see the true face of galactic politics. The screen changed to show a view from the surface of Altarian Prime. Zephyrian ground troops were moving through the ruins of a crystal city, hunting down survivors. As Jake watched in horror, a group of soldiers cornered a family of Altarians who were trying to protect their children. This is what happens to species too weak to defend themselves, Korvax continued. The galaxy belongs to the strong, not to pretty crystal creatures who think the universe cares about their feelings. One of the Zephyrian soldiers raised his weapon toward the Altarian family. Jake started to stand, but Lisa grabbed his arm. Jake, do not, she whispered. There is nothing we can do. But Jake was not looking at the screen anymore. He was looking around the council chamber at the faces of the other delegates. Some looked shocked, others seemed uncomfortable, but none of them looked truly angry. They all seemed to accept that this was just how the galaxy worked. The transmission ended, and Chairman Trilakx called for order again. We must respond to this act of aggression with appropriate measures, he announced. What measures? Jake found himself standing up. His voice carried clearly through the chamber, and other delegates turned to look at him. What exactly are you planning to do while Altarian civilians are being murdered? Trilakx looked uncomfortable. Captain Morrison, we understand your concern, but we must follow proper procedures. Perhaps a strongly worded resolution condemning the Zephyrian actions. A resolution? Jake's voice was flat and cold. You want to write a letter while children are dying. Captain, said the Coranian ambassador, a heavily armored alien who represented one of the more warlike species. Humans are new to Galactic. Politics. You do not understand how these things work. Sometimes worlds change hands. It is unfortunate, but it is the way of things. Jake looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring back at him. In 50 years of membership in the Galactic Council, humanity had always been polite, always followed the rules, always tried to find peaceful solutions. And what had it gotten them? A reputation as weaklings who could be ignored when real decisions needed to be made. "I see," Jake said quietly. "So the Galactic Council's response to the genocide of a member species is to file a complaint and hope the killers decide to stop on their own." "Captain Morrison," Chairman Trilak said nervously, "please remember that we are a civilization of laws and procedures. We cannot simply resort to violence every time there is a conflict." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his communicator and spoke into it clearly so everyone in the chamber could hear. "Morrison to New Horizon. Send a priority message to Earth Defense Command. Tell them the situation has changed. Tell them the Council has failed to protect our allies. And tell them—" Jake paused, looking around the chamber one more time. "Tell them the humans are done playing by Council rules." The chamber fell silent. Jake could feel the eyes of every delegate on him as he turned and walked toward the exit. "Captain Morrison," Chairman Trilak called after him, "where are you going?" Jake stopped at the door and looked back. "To help load refugees and treat the wounded. You know, the things that civilized people do when their friends are being murdered." As the door closed behind him, Jake heard the buzz of nervous conversation starting up again. Let them talk, he thought. Humans had spent 50 years proving they were civilized. Maybe it was time to show them what else humans could be when civilization failed. When Jake got back to his ship, he found Dr. Hammond's medical bay full of injured Altarians. The crystal beings were huddled together, their light dim with grief and fear. Some were missing limbs where their crystal bodies had been shattered. Others flickered weakly, their life force fading. "How many?" Jake asked quietly. 37 so far, Dr. Hammond replied. "More ships are coming in." "Jake, some of these are children. They keep asking why the metal people want to hurt them. I do not know what to tell them." Jake knelt down next to a small Altarian whose light was barely visible. The child's crystal body was cracked in several places, and one of its limbs was missing entirely. "Captain," the child whispered in its musical voice, "are the bad people going to come here too?" Jake felt something break inside his chest. Something that had been holding back 50 years of human restraint. "No," he said softly, reaching out to gently touch the child's uninjured limb. "The bad people are not going to hurt you anymore. I promise." As he stood up, Jake caught Lisa watching him with a strange expression on her face. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said quietly. "I just realized I have never seen you look like that before." "Like what?" Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed, "Like you are deciding whether someone deserves to live or die." 2 days after the attack on Altarian Prime, Jake received an unexpected message. Admiral Korvax wanted to meet with him personally aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Blood Talon. The message was polite, but had an undertone of mockery that made Jake's jaw clench. It could be a trap, Lisa warned as they prepared for the meeting. She was checking her diplomatic files while Tony ran security scans on the Zephyrian ship. "Of course it is a trap," Jake replied, adjusting his uniform. "But it is also an opportunity." Amy looked up from her engineering console. "Captain, I have been analyzing the Blood Talon specifications. Their shields are powerful, but they have some interesting weak points in their power distribution system." Jake turned to look at her. "Why are you analyzing their weak points?" "Amy?" Amy paused, seeming surprised by her own words. "I do not know, sir." I just thought we should know how their ship works. Tony nodded from his station. I have been doing the same thing with their communications. Their encryption is good, but it has patterns. And their crew rotation schedules are very predictable. Jake studied his crew's faces. Without realizing it, they had all started thinking like soldiers instead of diplomats. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. All right, Jake said finally. Lisa, Tony, you are with me. Amy, keep monitoring their systems. And everyone keep an open channel to Earth. The shuttle ride to the Blood Talon was quiet. Jake stared out the window at the massive Zephyrian warship. It was dark gray and covered in weapon ports. The hull was scarred from dozens of battles, and Jake could see trophy racks mounted on the outer armor, displaying artifacts from conquered worlds. The Zephyrian crew that met them at the docking bay was typical of their species. Tall, muscular reptilian. Humanoids with dark scales and predator eyes. They wore military uniforms decorated with the bones and medals of defeated enemies. Their leader, a captain named Vorik, looked at the humans with barely concealed contempt. So these are the famous human diplomats, Vorik said in accented but clear English. You look smaller than I expected. Jake smiled politely. We appreciate the Admiral taking time to meet with us. Vorik laughed, showing rows of sharp teeth. The Admiral finds you amusing. Follow me. As they walked through the ship's corridors, Jake noticed everything. The weapons storage areas, the security checkpoints, the number of crew members they passed. Behind him, he could hear Tony's breathing change slightly, a sign that he was memorizing everything he saw, just like Jake was. The corridors of the Blood Talon were decorated with trophies from Korvax's conquests. Weapons from defeated armies hung on the walls alongside flags and banners from fallen worlds. Jake counted artifacts from at least 20 different species, including some that he recognized as supposedly extinct. They passed through what looked like a trophy room, and Jake felt his stomach turn. Display cases held personal items taken from conquered populations, jewelry, art, toys, even what looked like family photographs from species that used visual records. Impressive, is it not? Captain Vorik said, noticing Jake's attention. Admiral, Korvax has been collecting for over 30 years. Each item represents a victory over weakness. Lisa moved closer to Jake. He could feel the tension radiating from her, the same careful control that he was fighting to maintain. They finally reached the bridge, where Admiral Korvax was waiting. The Zephyrian leader was even more imposing. In person, nearly 8 feet tall with dark green scales and yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. His uniform was covered in decorations that Jake realized were made from the bones of his enemies. Captain Morrison, Korvax said, his voice a low rumble. Welcome aboard my ship. I trust you are enjoying the tour? It is very educational, Jake replied, keeping his voice level. Korvax laughed. I imagine it is. Please sit. I thought we should discuss the current situation like civilized beings. They sat at a conference table in the center of the bridge. Around them, Zephyrian officers continued their work, but Jake could feel their attention focused on the meeting. On the main screen, he could see tactical displays showing the ongoing bombardment of remaining Altarian worlds. I understand you. Humans fancy yourselves as peacemakers, Korvax began. It is an interesting concept, but ultimately naive. The galaxy is not a peaceful place, Captain. It is ruled by the strong, and the weak exist only to serve or be consumed. The Altarians were not threatening anyone, Lisa said quietly. They were a peaceful species that contributed to galactic science and culture. Were? Korvax smiled, showing his predator teeth. An interesting choice of words, human. Yes, they were peaceful, and now they are mostly dead. This is what happens to species that refuse to acknowledge reality. Tony shifted in his seat, and Jake could see his hands clenching into fists. The young man was usually cheerful and easygoing, but there was something dangerous building behind his eyes. The reality, Korvax continued, is that weakness is not a virtue. It is a fatal flaw. Your Altarian friends believed that their pretty crystals and advanced technology would protect them. But technology means nothing without the will to use it for war. Korvax stood and walked to one of his trophy cases. He pulled out a broken piece of crystal that pulsed weakly with dying light. This came from an Altarian child, he said casually, holding the crystal up to examine it. Fascinating how they continue to glow even after death. I wonder if they feel pain the way real species do. Jake felt something snap inside his chest. The polite diplomatic mask that he had worn for 3 years suddenly felt like it was suffocating him. He looked at Korvax, holding the remains of a murdered child, and felt a cold rage that he had never experienced before. That is an interesting question, Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. I wonder if Zephyrians feel pain the way real species do. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Korvax turned to look at Jake with surprise, while the other Zephyrians on the bridge stopped what they were doing. Excuse me? Korvax said. Jake stood slowly, his movements precise and controlled. You heard me, Admiral. I am curious about Zephyrian pain tolerance. It seems like something we should investigate. Lisa and Tony were staring at Jake with wide eyes. They had never heard him speak in that tone before. Cold, calculating, and full of barely contained violence. Korvax laughed, but there was uncertainty in it now. Are you threatening me, human? On my own ship, surrounded by my crew? Jake smiled, and it was not a diplomatic smile. It was the expression of a predator deciding whether its prey was worth the effort to hunt. I am not threatening you, Admiral. I am simply making an observation. You see, you have been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about human nature. And what is that? You think we are weak because we prefer diplomacy to violence. You think we are prey animals because we try to solve problems with words instead of weapons. Jake's voice was getting quieter, which somehow made it more terrifying. But you have made a critical error in your assessment. Korvax was no longer laughing. The bridge had gone completely silent, except for the hum of the ship's engines. You see, Admiral, we are not weak. We are not prey animals. We are not tame. Jake took a step closer to Korvax, who despite being much larger suddenly seemed to shrink back. We are simply civilized, and there is a very important difference between the two. Captain, Lisa said quietly, we should go. Jake nodded, but did not take his eyes off Korvax. You are right, of course. We have a schedule to keep. As they walked toward the exit, Jake stopped and turned back to face the Zephyrian Admiral. One more thing, Admiral. You asked if the Altarians feel pain the way real species do. I can answer that question for you. Jake's smile was gone now, replaced by an expression of absolute certainty. They do, and so do their friends. The shuttle ride back to Harmony Prime was silent until they were halfway there. Then Tony spoke up from the pilot's seat. Captain, that was terrifying. What was? Jake asked. You. I have never seen you look at anyone like that before. For a minute there, I thought you were going to kill him with your bare hands. Lisa nodded. Jake, what happened to you in there? You were like a completely different person. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the stars. Maybe I was, he said finally. Maybe we all were. When they docked with Harmony Prime, Jake immediately went to his quarters and sent a coded message to Earth. It was short and used phrases that would mean nothing to anyone intercepting it. But Earth Defense Command would understand. The message read, Diplomatic solutions. No longer viable. Situation requires alternative approach. Request immediate consultation. Within 6 hours, Jake received a reply. It was even shorter than his message, containing only a single word: understood. That night, Jake could not sleep. He stood, his window looking out at the refugee ships that continued to arrive from Altarian space. Each one carried survivors of the genocide, crystal beings whose light had been dimmed by unspeakable trauma. Lisa found him there at dawn. "Jake, are you all right?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Do you know what the worst part is?" "What?" "I enjoyed it." When I saw the fear in Korvax's eyes, when I realized that for the first time in his life, someone was looking at him like he was prey instead of predator. Jake paused. "I enjoyed it, and that scares me." Lisa put her hand on his shoulder. "Maybe it should not scare you. Maybe it should scare them." The changes began within hours of Jake's meeting with Admiral Korvax. At first, they were subtle things that only someone who knew humans well would notice. Dr. Hammond started asking Amy for equipment that was not in any medical manual. Tony began spending his off-duty time studying Zephyrian military communications instead of the entertainment channels he usually enjoyed. Amy's engineering projects became more focused on systems that had nothing to do with life support or propulsion. Jake noticed all of this, but he said nothing. He was too busy dealing with his own transformation. The message from Earth Defense Command had been brief. Package delivery in 72 hours. Prepare for extended consultation. Jake knew what that meant. Earth was sending people, and they were not going to be diplomats. On the morning of the third day, a small transport ship docked with Harmony Prime. According to the manifest, it carried cultural attaches and research specialists who were coming to help with the refugee crisis. But Jake had seen ships like this before, during his military service years ago. It was built for speed and stealth, not comfort. The man who stepped off the transport did not look like a cultural attach. Commander Sam Parker was tall and lean, with short gray hair and scars on his hands that told stories Jake did not want to know. He moved like a predator trying to look tame, and his eyes missed nothing as he surveyed the docking bay. "Captain Morrison," Parker said, extending his hand. "I understand you requested a consultation." Jake shook the offered hand and felt calluses that came from years of weapon handling. "Commander Parker, welcome to Harmony Prime." "Thank you. I brought a few specialists with me. I hope you can find quarters for them." The specialists were an interesting group. Dr. Ellen Cross introduced herself as a trauma surgeon, but her medical bag contained instruments that Jake was pretty sure were not for healing. Chief Warrant Officer Rick Stone was supposedly in engineering. Consultant, but the way he examined the station's security systems suggested a different kind of expertise. There were 6 others, all with civilian titles and military bearing. Within a day, the human section of Harmony Prime felt different. The new arrivals were polite and professional, but there was an edge to them that the regular diplomatic staff lacked. They asked questions about station security, ship schedules, and communication protocols. They studied deck plans and memorized evacuation routes. Jake's regular crew began changing too. Dr. Hammond, who had always been gentle and soft-spoken, started organizing his medical supplies with military efficiency. Tony spent hours with Rick Stone, learning about advanced communication techniques that were definitely not part of standard diplomatic training. Amy worked with Dr. Cross on projects that she would not discuss, even with Jake. The transformation was most obvious in Lisa. She had always been diplomatic and controlled, but now there was steel underneath her politeness. When she spoke to other species, they found themselves unconsciously stepping back. She still smiled and used all the proper diplomatic phrases, but something in her eyes made it clear that her patience had limits. The rest of the station began to notice. Other species started giving humans more space in the corridors. Conversations grew quieter when humans entered a room. The casual disrespect that some aliens had shown toward the weak human diplomats disappeared entirely. Jake was in his office reviewing refugee reports when Chairman Trilak's requested a private meeting. The tall, blue-skinned alien seemed nervous as he entered Jake's quarters. "Captain Morrison, I hope you do not mind the intrusion, but I wanted to discuss the current situation." "Of course, Chairman. Please sit." Trilak looked around the room, noticing the new security equipment and the additional personnel who seemed to be always present. "I understand Earth has sent additional staff to help with the refugee crisis." "That is correct. We felt we needed more resources to properly assist the Altarian survivors." "Yes, about that." Trilak shifted uncomfortably. "The Council has been discussing possible responses to the Zephyrian actions. We are considering economic sanctions, and perhaps a formal censure." Jake looked at the alien leader for a long moment. "Economic sanctions. After 3 billion Altarians have been murdered. Captain, you must understand that we cannot simply resort to violence. The Council maintains peace through dialogue and compromise." "Peace." Jake's voice was flat. "Chairman, with respect, there is no peace. There is only the temporary absence of war while the strong decide who to kill next." Trilak leaned forward. "Captain, I am concerned about the changes I have observed in human behavior recently. Your people seem different, more aggressive." Jake smiled, and Trilak unconsciously moved back in his chair. "We are not more aggressive, Chairman. We are simply less patient with genocide. The Council is worried that humans might take unilateral action against the Zephyrians. Such action would be a violation of Council law and could destabilize the entire region. The region is already destabilized. The Zephyrians have made it clear that Council law means nothing to them. Why should it mean anything to us?" Trilak was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with how to respond. "Captain, may I speak frankly?" "Please do." "For 50 years, humans have been model members of the Council. You have followed all protocols, respected all treaties, and sought peaceful solutions to every conflict. But now, Trilak paused. "Now, there are rumors that Earth has military assets that were never reported to the Council. Ships and weapons that violate the Galactic Military Limitation Treaty." Jake's expression did not change. "What kind of rumors?" "Intelligence reports suggest that humans may have been preparing for war even while maintaining a peaceful facade. Some species are beginning to wonder if humanity's diplomatic approach was genuine or merely a deception while you built up military strength." Jake was quiet for a long time, studying the alien's face. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Chairman, let me ask you a question. What do you know about Earth?" "I know it is classified as a death world. High gravity, extreme weather, dangerous predators. Most species consider it barely habitable." "That is correct. Earth is a world where everything is trying to kill everything else. The plants are poisonous, the animals are predators. The weather can destroy cities, and the geology regularly tries to remake the surface." Jake's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Do you know what kind of species evolves on a world like that?" Trilak shook his head. "Survivors, predators, beings that can adapt to any environment and overcome any obstacle." Jake stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the refugee ships. "But we are also intelligent enough to understand that civilization requires restraint. So when we joined the Council, we agreed to limit our military capabilities and solve conflicts through diplomacy. And now?" Jake turned back to face Trilak. "Now we have learned that restraint only works when everyone agrees to be restrained. The Zephyrians have made it clear that they prefer the law of the jungle. So perhaps it is time to remind them why apex predators from Deathworlds do not usually worry about lizards." Trilak stood up quickly. Captain, I must ask you directly. Is Earth planning military action against the Zephyrian Empire? Jake smiled again, and this time Trilix actually stepped backward. Chairman, for 50 years, humans have followed every council law and respected every treaty. We have been patient, diplomatic, and reasonable. But the Zephyrians have taught us an important lesson about the galaxy we live in. What lesson is that? That civilization is a choice, not a guarantee. And when some species choose to abandon civilization, others must be prepared to remind them why it exists. Trilix left the meeting visibly shaken. Word spread quickly through the diplomatic community that something fundamental had changed in humanity's approach to galactic politics. The next morning, Jake received another coded message from Earth. This one was longer and contained shipping schedules, supply manifests, and personnel transfers that would mean nothing to casual observers. But Jake understood every line. The Terran Defense Fleet was mobilizing. That afternoon, Lisa found Jake in the observation lounge, watching the stars. She sat down beside him without speaking for several minutes. "How long do you think we have?" she asked finally. "Before what?" "Before we stop pretending entirely." Jake considered the question. "The fleet will be here in 6 days. After that, it depends on what Korvax does next. And if he continues the attacks?" Jake's expression was cold and distant. "Then he will learn why evolution on a death world produces a very specific kind of species." Lisa nodded. "I have been thinking about what you said to Trilix, about restraint only working when everyone agrees to be restrained. What about it?" "I think we have been restraining ourselves for so long that we forgot what we were restraining." Lisa's voice was quiet but steady. "For 50 years, we have been the galaxy's nice guys. The ones who always try to talk instead of fight, who follow the rules even when no one else does. And now? Now I remember what humans were like before we decided to be civilized. What we had to be like to survive on Earth long enough to build civilization in the first place." Jake turned to look at her. "Are you ready for that? For what we might have to become?" Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. It was not her diplomatic smile, the one she had used in countless negotiations. This was something older and more danger. The human fleet arrived without warning. One moment, the space around Altarian Prime showed only Zephyrian warships continuing their bombardment of the dying world. The next moment, 37 human vessels dropped out of faster than light. Travel in perfect attack formation. Admiral Korvax was on the bridge of his flagship when his sensors officer began screaming alerts. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts appearing throughout the system. Unknown ship designs, massive energy signatures." Korvax moved to the tactical display, his yellow eyes widening as he saw the human fleet spreading across his formation like a net closing around trapped fish. The human ships were unlike anything in Council databases. Where they're diplomatic. Vessels had been smooth and unthreatening. These craft were angular, predatory, and covered in weapon systems that made Zephyrian battleships look primitive. "Communications," Korvax barked. "Get me Admiral Morrison, or whoever is commanding that fleet." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the largest human ship. The woman standing in the center wore a uniform that Korvax did not recognize, dark blue with silver insignia that seemed to absorb light. Her hair was short and gray, her face was marked by scars, and her eyes held the cold fire of barely controlled violence. "I am Admiral Kate Hendricks of the Terran Defense Fleet," she said, her voice carrying clearly across space. "You are Admiral Korvax of the Zephyrian Empire." "Admiral Hendricks," Korvax replied, trying to project confidence he did not feel. "I was not aware that humans possessed military assets of this magnitude. Your ships are not in any council registry." Hendricks smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. There are many things about humans that are not in Council registries, Admiral. We have found it useful to maintain certain capabilities in reserve. Around the bridge of the Blood Talon, Zephyrian officers were running tactical analyses on the human fleet. Their reports were increasingly urgent and panicked. Admiral, his weapons officer reported, their ships are showing energy signatures 30% higher than our most powerful battleships. And sir, they are all targeting us. Korvax looked back at the screen. Admiral Hendricks, what are your intentions here? My intentions are simple, Admiral. You are going to cease all attacks on Altarian worlds immediately. You are going to withdraw your forces to Zephyrian space. And you are going to surrender yourself and your senior officers for trial as war criminals. Korvax laughed, the sound echoing through his bridge. You cannot be serious. You have 37 ships. I have over 200 vessels in this system alone. Quality over quantity, Admiral, Hendricks replied calmly. But if you prefer a demonstration, one of the human destroyers, no larger than a Zephyrian frigate, turned toward a Zephyrian cruiser that was bombarding the planet's surface. A single beam of coherent energy lanced out from the human ship. The Zephyrian cruiser's shields flared, held for exactly 3 seconds, then collapsed entirely. The beam continued through the ship's hull, cutting it cleanly in half. The bridge of the Blood Talon fell silent as they watched the cruiser break apart and drift away in 2 separate pieces. How is that possible? Korvax whispered. Hendricks heard him. Admiral, your species has been the dominant military power in this region for decades. You have grown comfortable, lazy, content to rely on numerical superiority and intimidation. But humans come from a world where everything is trying to kill everything else. We do not have the luxury of becoming lazy. More human ships were moving. Now, their formations spreading throughout the system with deadly precision. Korvax watched his tactical displays as human vessels began systematically destroying his fleet's communication relays and supply ships. You are making a mistake, Korvax snarled. The Galactic Council will condemn this unprovoked attack. Unprovoked? Hendricks' voice went dangerously quiet. Admiral, you have murdered 3 billion innocent civilians. You have broadcast their deaths across the galaxy as entertainment. You have made it clear that you consider genocide an acceptable tool of policy. The human fleet was moving into attack positions now, their ships flowing through space like hunting predators surrounding prey. For 50 years, Hendricks continued, humanity has operated under the assumption that civilization means something. We believe that membership in the Galactic Council created obligations to protect the innocent, defend the weak, and maintain peace through justice rather than force. Her image on the screen shifted, and Korvax could see the bridge of her flagship. Behind her, human officers worked at their stations with calm efficiency, their faces showing no emotion as they prepared for battle. We were wrong, Hendricks said. The Council has proven that civilization is merely a comfortable lie that prey species tell themselves while predators sharpen their claws. Since you prefer the law of the jungle, we will give you exactly that. Korvax tried one final bluff. Admiral, if you attack us, you will be violating every treaty and law that governs galactic civilization. The Council will have no choice but to declare war on humanity. Hendricks laughed, and the sound made even Korvax's experienced warriors shift nervously. The Council? She asked. The same Council that has spent the last week debating the wording of their condemnation while you murdered children? The same Council that considers economic sanctions an appropriate response to genocide? She leaned forward, and her eyes seemed to burn through the screen. Admiral, let me explain something about humans that your intelligence files apparently missed. We are not civilized because we are weak. We are civilized because we choose to be. But when someone forces us to choose between civilization and justice, the human fleet opened fire. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. Human ships moved with impossible coordination, their weapons carving through Zephyrian shields like they did not exist. The Blood Talon, flagship of the mighty Zephyrian Empire, found itself under attack by 3 human destroyers that systematically disabled its weapons, shields, and engines. Korvax watched in horror as his fleet was methodically destroyed around him. Human ships did not just defeat their targets, they hunted them down with predatory efficiency. Zephyrian captains, who tried to surrender, were allowed to abandon ship in escape pods. Those who continued fighting were destroyed without mercy. "This is impossible," Korvax muttered as his ship shuddered under human weapons fire. "Your ships are too small, too few. How are you doing this?" Captain Jake Morrison's voice answered from the communication system. Korvax turned to see the human diplomat on his screen, but this was not the polite, reasonable man he had met days earlier. This Jake Morrison wore a military uniform and had eyes like frozen steel. "Admiral, you made the same mistake that every bully makes. You assumed that because we chose not to fight, we did not know how to fight." The Blood Talon's bridge exploded in sparks as human weapons overloaded its power systems. "You see," Jake continued conversationally, "humans did not evolve as diplomats or scientists or explorers. We evolved as persistence hunters on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We are the species that tracked mammoth across ice, ages that crossed oceans in wooden boats that split atoms and reached for the stars." Korvax's ship was dying around him, but he could not stop staring at the human captain's face. "We spent 50 years pretending to be tame, because that is what civilized beings do," Jake said. "But you made one fatal mistake, Admiral." "What?" Korvax whispered. Jake's smile was cold and sharp. "You hurt our friends." The Blood Talon's main reactor went critical, and Korvax had just enough time to reach an escape pod before his flagship tore itself apart, as he drifted in space. Watching the remains of his fleet scattered across the system, Korvax could hear Admiral Hendricks broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Hendricks to all Zephyrian forces in this system. You have 30 minutes to evacuate all personnel, to escape pods and abandon your ships. Any vessel that does not comply will be destroyed. Any vessel that attempts to continue attacks on Altarian civilians will be hunted down and eliminated." The surviving Zephyrian ships began launching escape pods almost immediately. Hendricks continued her broadcast. "To the Galactic Council, and to any species listening to this transmission. For 50 years, humanity has attempted to work within your system of laws and treaties. We have been patient, diplomatic, and reasonable. But you have failed in your most basic obligation to protect the innocent." Human ships were spreading throughout the system now, their medical vessels racing toward Altarian Prime to aid survivors while their warships established defensive positions. Effective immediately, Earth hereby establishes the Altarian Protection Zone. Any ship entering this space without permission will be turned away. Any ship attempting to harm Altarian civilians will be destroyed. This zone will remain in effect until such time as the Galactic Council demonstrates that it can fulfill its obligation to protect member species from genocide. In his escape pod, Admiral Korvax listened to the transmission and felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. Not fear of death or pain, but fear of a species that he had completely misjudged. "We are not conquerors," Hendricks continued. "We are not interested in building an empire or subjugating other species. We simply want to ensure that genocide is not an acceptable tool of galactic politics." The transmission ended, and Spar,